Hello, everyone, and welcome to another ASUG Partner Webcast. My name is Maureen McInerney, Partner Marketing Specialist here at ASUG, and I'll be your moderator for this event. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to join us for this presentation. Today's webcast is being recorded. The link to the recording and the accompanying slides will be posted to the ASUG website calendar of events, and all registrants will receive a follow-up email with the link to those materials once the webcast has concluded. I'd like to remind our audience members that you can submit your questions at any time by clicking the purple Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Today's webcast is Lessons Learned with SAP S/4HANA Implementation at Delta Faucet. Our speakers today are Tony Wellman from Delta Faucet and John Hoover and Sean Mahorter from GyanSys, Inc. And with that, I'll hand it over to John to get us started today.
Thank you very much, Maureen, and thank you everyone for attending today to follow us on our Delta Faucet implementation case study and lessons learned for S4. So what I'd like to go over the abstract today. For our abstract, our session today will cover greenfield implementation for Delta Faucet on S/4HANA. The version implemented here at Delta Faucet is S/4HANA 1610, and the scope of this S4 Digital Core ERP implementation was product lifecycle management, order to cash, forecasting, planning, scheduling, manufacturing operations with various modules and functions, finance and controlling, our FICO team, and BW4HANA with embedded analytics. Our presentation will cover the scope, implementation of Delta Faucet, and a lot of lessons learned, especially taking the S4 journey early and what improvements have been made in S4 today. And we'll talk briefly about what the future roadmap here at Delta Faucet looks like for things that we're reviewing and analyzing. And with that, I'm going to let our panel introduce themselves today with Tony Wellman.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Tony Wellman. I am the Director of Business Solutions for Delta Faucet Company. I've been with Delta for about a year and a half now, and I've been working in the SAP space for around 15 years.
Thank you, Tony. I'm John Hoover, VP of Delivery for the U.S. for GyanSys. Been doing SAP now for 21 years, manufacturing primarily, discrete manufacturing in the PLM, PPM areas.
And I'm Sean Mahorter. I'm the Supply Chain Practice Director at GyanSys. I've been doing supply chain consulting for about 20 years now. Across a host of applications, APO, IBP, SAP production planning, materials management, IM, bearing configuration, and so on and so forth. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Sean. And with that, so that's the introduction of our panel today, Tony, Sean, and myself. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Tony Wellman to talk about Delta Faucet.
Hopefully everyone is familiar with our brands. So we go to market under 3 brands for the Delta Faucet Company. Brizo is our luxury brand. Delta is our most known brand, and Peerless is our affordable design brand. We currently employ over 2,000 folks across the United States and many parts of the globe. We're headquartered in Indianapolis, Indiana. We have 5 locations in the United States and 1 internationally. From a product roadmap perspective, we roll out about 35 new product lines each year, and we've just gone live with our first SAP implementation. From a product category standpoint, we play in many different categories related to water management, most notably faucets, but also shower heads and various other items around the kitchen and bath.
Thank you for that good introduction, Tony. And I want to talk just for a moment about GyanSys. We're the primary partner with Delta Faucet and have been working with Delta since 2015 on various items beyond even SAP from an IT standpoint. GyanSys is headquartered in Carmel, Indiana, northern Indianapolis. We've got 13 years organic growth, 600 plus consultants now globally. We are a global delivery partner, gold partner with SAP, with offices in both Bangalore, India, Hyderabad, and Manila as well. There are exciting news. We're going to be opening a new office in Europe at the end of this year. So GyanSys is a recommended by Gartner for SAP S/4HANA implementations. We have gotten into this. We're lucky. We got in very early on the process in SAP HANA, starting way back in the 1503, and started our training of our team. So we've been kind of leading edge, implementing several clients, both greenfield and brownfield implementations, doing a lot of S4 assessments right now, road mapping for clients, as everyone, probably a lot of folks on this call who are already SAP ECC users in various states in their landscape, getting ready to make the jump to an in-place, as I like to call a technical upgrade, or also a full brownfield with business transformation. Some accelerators we have, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but a lot of tools for S4 remediation. GyanSys has worked with SAP. We've created a lot of our own tools, especially for business partner loading. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the slides as a lesson learned, going from the master data, vendor, customer, employees, to business partners. Several EDI integrators, many things from a tool and acceleration point of view, which helps us with our clients. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tony to talk a little bit more specifically about the project and how Delta arrived at SAP.
Thanks, John. So to provide a little background on our case for change here at Delta Faucet, there were three primary drivers for why we embarked on this journey, this multi-phase journey. One was a risk reduction related to our former ERP platform. We were on a very old version of JD Edwards as our primary ERP with many integration points to other applications that may or may not have been supported. So we had risk around our environment. Second was to simplify that architecture over time. That not only was intended to streamline the systems, but also the support and the resources needed to run our overall architecture. And then the last, and probably most importantly, was capability enablement. So we targeted a few specific areas for the first phase of our deployment, primarily in our new product development and BI spaces. But really over time, this is seen as a vehicle to grow our business and help us make different decisions around how we want to grow our business in the future. So as I referenced, this is a multi-phase journey for us at Delta Faucet. The initial phase of this project kicked off over 2 years ago, and we've most recently gone live with phase one in May of 2018 and wrapped up hypercare within the last month, and now really embarking on the second and third phases of our journey, which we're framing as the ERP roadmap for our team internally. As you can see, there's some statistics on the bottom of the slide here that will give you a little bit of scope and scale to the project that we implemented in phase one. It was pretty much all-encompassing for our business process and touched everything from the product lifecycle and our customer lifecycle. I won't go through the details of this next slide, but it just attempts to highlight some of the complexity in our ecosystem prior to embarking on this project, and it shows where we had a potential to gain efficiency through a consolidation of our platform, and really drives back to those first three key drivers that we talked about a slide ago. This next slide is a current position of where we've landed after phase one, and you'll see significant decrease in the amount of unsupported applications, as well as a consolidation of some of the core function. And that's allowed us to streamline our organization and focus more on value creation and where we can drive the business moving forward, and less about the day-to-day run the business from an IT perspective. So, John, I'll kick it back over to you, and we can talk about what we consider from an implementation standpoint and some of the things that we plan to do in the future.
Thank you, Tony. So what we with Delta Faucet, being good partners and friends with the team here, what we worked on implementing was pricing, rebates, and commissions was in scope. Utilize the Fiori interface through the browser to try to avoid deploying SAP GUI out to the field. Implement MRP Live in HANA. Implement EWM instead of WM. A lot of discussion around that one, which I'll let Sean speak to as the Director of Supply Chain for that team. Leverage advanced ATP, which is backfill order processing, BOP, for fill rate and allocation, and explore elements of IBP, replacement of Demantra, IT Factory Planner, things like we've seen on the previous slide. Inventory response, supply planning, and production planning, demand scheduling, PPDS, which actually came out relatively new in the 1610 version, and I'm sure Sean will dive into a little bit on that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sean to dive into a few things here in detail on some of the functionality.
So I'm going to go through these slides, and they're kind of broken out by area. First area I'm going to talk about is pricing, rebates, and commissions. Initially, we had looked at bringing Vistex in as a third-party tool to do all of our pricing, rebates, and commissions. At about that same time, SAP had come out and said that they've got functionality now in S4. At the time, it was 1509. That addressed the requirements that we had around rebates and commissions pretty squarely. So that, plus the fact that Vistex actually hadn't certified themselves for the 1509 version, kind of led us back to SAP again to implement rebates and commissions in SAP. So we ended up going through there. We ended up having to have some help from SAP to get that done. But by and large, I would say that the rebates and commissions implementation has been largely successful here. It pretty much hit all of the boxes that we needed to hit, and is doing what we needed to do. So,
which was great, considering that was
considering it was a brand new piece of functionality. I'm actually very, very pleased with that. Considering the next area that I want to talk about, Fiori. So at one point in our project, we actually made the decision to go all Fiori all the time as the main user interface to SAP. As we started testing through that, we started to realize fairly quickly that while a lot of those Fiori apps are mature enough to be able to handle user interaction, there were some of them that weren't quite up to snuff, and so we ended up walking that decision back and going back to the SAP GUI again. That said, and you can see some of the reasons here, like vanishing scroll bars, and some of the data was kind of inconsistent the way it was displayed. Some of the performance was pretty bad. We are going to evaluate Fiori again in our next phase. We see that there's some low-hanging fruit there that we could probably utilize to speed some things up and make the user interaction more streamlined.
So Sean, can I add one point there? From a Fiori perspective, if you're considering that as part of an implementation, just know that there's a lot of additional security overhead that's going to come with that.
Fair point.
And that's one of the drivers for the decision we made, is that there was a lot more complexity there than we had initially understood, and was going to drive timeline creep to our overall program. So that's why we elected to pull out of that for the first phase.
Fiori has all additional, or I should say, security objects that are additional to your normal SAP role-based security objects. So yeah, you kind of had to duplicate all that work to be able to fire Fiori up.
Yeah, and then also some Fiori apps, as Sean pointed out, worked great, very fast. Some were slow, and there were OSS notes put out. So a lot of that has been addressed now in 1709, and of course there's been quarter releases every quarter. But of course we started this about 2 years ago, right after we started on 1511, jumped to 1610 mid-project, which was a good decision, by the way.
Right.
We'll talk about that in a few minutes.
Okay. Next slide. MRP Live on HANA. So we definitely went down the path of, as soon as it updates, we definitely went down the path of attempting to implement MRP Live for our project. We ended up not doing it. So we actually went back to the old standard MRP that kind of runs in ECC. The reason for that had absolutely nothing to do with the functionality of MRP Live on HANA or whether it is functional or anything was broken. It had really to do with a custom object that we had that required planned purchase orders, and MRP Live no longer creates planned purchase orders. It only creates purchase recs for purchase parts. So because of that limitation and what we had specified out in one of our custom objects, we decided to back off of MRP Live. That said, again, in the future phase that we're getting ready to embark on, we plan to address that and change that custom object so that we can take advantage of MRP Live and some of the performance functionality there.
Maybe one overall note that I didn't highlight earlier, everything around the supply chain and operations space, we made some decisions as an organization to keep interfaces in place to existing systems, which are driving some of the things that Sean will talk about, to reduce organizational change management risk. So that was a known and intentional decision by Delta Faucet to manage risk for the first phase of project.
Correct. Yeah, so as an example of that, just for the audience, I could throw out the warehouse management system stayed in place. That was chosen interface to that just to minimize that change management for that group.
Right. I think we have a slide on that too, so I'll address that one right there.
Next.
Next slide, EWM instead of WM. So we had a very large discussion early in this project about whether to implement standard warehouse management in SAP or to go to EWM. EWM was embedded in 1610, at least parts of it, and so we evaluated our requirements around that and decided, and by the way, at the time as we were discussing this with SAP, I think they have backed off of this stance, but at the time SAP was telling us if you implement WM and later go to EWM, they had no migration path to go from the one software suite to the other. So you were going to have to re-implement in EWM anything that you did in WM. We looked at the requirements that we had. We don't do a lot of crazy warehouse type stuff. So our requirement list was pretty small, and we felt confident that WM was going to hit a lot more of the boxes and that EWM was going to be a lot more overhead than it was probably worth at the time. Again, that's also something else that in our future phase we're going to go and assess and evaluate, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
And current for SAP is 2024, 2025 for the end of life?
Should be 2025. Most of those applications are 2025 when they're
25 end of life.
Yeah, that's what they're
targeted.
That's
targeted.
That's the current. Yeah, that's what they're telling us. Whether that becomes true or not, we shall see. I personally think that sunsetting actual WM in 2025 is going to be a tough sell. That's just my 2 cents. Okay, next. Backorder processing and Fiori allocation. So we do a lot of this at Delta. We're running BOP on a pretty regular basis. Honestly, the BOP stuff didn't really gain a lot in my opinion. Instead of having 3 levels of stratification in the BOP algorithms, you now have win, gain, redistribute, fill, and lose in the algorithm. So you've got 3 levels instead of 5. I would say that if you need that, it's there. Most don't need it, but I don't think that really was an influencing factor for us. But we do use quite a bit of backorder processing and using that to do allocation right now. So, and as we said, we're looking in phase 2 to try to get rid of a lot of the custom code that we did, and advanced ATP and backorder processing is one of those areas where SAP is definitely focused on trying to migrate as much of those functionalities from APO Global ATP as they can. I think that what we're seeing now is just the spearhead of that. You're going to see probably the next thing coming down the pike in standard S4 is going to be location substitution, and after that you're going to see product and location substitution. So those are probably going to be the next two places that SAP goes with development in that area, and I think that that's the two places that most people are really focused on seeing functionality around, because that's pretty common request. Okay. Next, IBP and PPDS. So we did not implement IBP in phase one. We did not implement PPDS in phase one. The reason was, again, back to Tony's earlier comment of risk reduction. The reason that we did not implement PPDS in phase one was very simple. We had a tool that Delta was very, very comfortable with that managed their capacity, that was their legacy system. It didn't, and so because of that and risk reduction, we decided not to implement PPDS in our phase one. That is absolutely something that is on the table for our phase two, and we are actively pursuing and assessing the ability to go use PPDS, production planning and detailed scheduling, in phase two, in addition to IBP response and supply. Delta Faucet's I2 setup is such that they have kind of a two-level algorithm that they run. The first level is allocating parts based on prioritized demand. That is something that response and supply and IBP is going to try to fill that role. And then the next loop that they do in that planning run is that they go in and once those parts are allocated to those products based on the demand priorities, anything that doesn't have missing parts, they then take back into a capacity planning algorithm to do automated capacity leveling. And so that's what we're going to leverage PPDS to try to hit that functionality. And so that's our phase two plan around that stuff, to be able to get rid of I2, factory planner. Okay. Next thing, product lifecycle management, and I'm going to hand it back over to John Hoover again.
Yeah, so one thing we did here, and Tony hit on this high level when he started us off, was product lifecycle management here at Delta Faucet was in many, I'd say, small systems scattered around, independent databases, Excel sheets. So what we did here at Delta is, for new product development, we really kind of synergized them and did some business transformation as part of this project, because the risk was pretty low. It was a burning platform for the old databases. We did put them into SAP PLM using engineering records, document management system, using compliance, different areas of compliance, quality management. So we did get that team and a very, very good process built into SAP, and also an interface to Team Center. So really part of the process still stays in Team Center as their front-end PDM system to start off, and then part of it is inside of SAP PLM. One thing we did hit from a lessons learned, and we'll talk about that, was also very similar to Vistex, wasn't ready from an interface or confirmed, validated version, was not certified for S4. So we did have to work through that and work through some hiccups of that, but we did get that to work pretty successfully. So really, again, part of that lesson learned is when you do S4, make sure you check all third-party applications, plugins, etc. Now, one thing we haven't implemented yet here at Delta Faucet, and we're still analyzing it, is portfolio and project management. So we're doing some assessments now. We're getting ready to start those assessments. Engineering Control Center, possibly. Some other enhancements in the quality management area, adding in gauges, more plugins to the plant maintenance side. We did implement, I think we kind of glossed over that, but we did do plant maintenance here as well at Delta Faucet. So quite a lot of functionality in that digital core was implemented here at Delta Faucet, quite a large project. And of course, as I mentioned, compliance earlier with integrations to their SIBO step system as well, which holds a lot of their manuals, compliance photos for websites, etc., for the primary large business-to-business customers at Delta Faucet. So, and I'm going to invite Tony and Sean to jump in on these next few slides. So this is where we're going to go over the next 5 or 10 minutes, go over some lessons learned, things we want to impart to the community to help strengthen our community in SAP, to help it grow, with our partners, of course, at ASUG for the SAP User Group for Americas. So MRP Live, we kind of hit on that earlier, some of the must-use stuff, must-use new stuff, really significant performance increases. Of course, you need to use Fiori, is required for MRP Live to work. CDS views, which is core data services views for reporting. I don't know if there's anything, Tony or Sean, you want to add on the CDS front.
I think on CDS views, if I take a step back and just talk about reporting and analytics in general, there's still a lot of, in the marketplace, I think there's a lot of misalignment on how you now use enterprise data warehouse versus all of the embedded analytics function, and what the maturity level of that embedded analytics function is within core S4. I know we really struggled with building the use case here for embedded analytics given the nature and maturity level of a lot of the CDS views. But it's also a learning area, I think, for a lot of the consultants in this space who haven't done a ton of deployment using CDS. So as the product matures, I think the ecosystem from the support network will mature. It's certainly an area from a Delta Faucet standpoint that we want to utilize more heavily in the future. And we're trying to find that right balance between our enterprise data warehouse and what we put in there versus what we use directly out of S4.
Perfect, thank you. And so inside of S4, and I just want to talk about this for a moment, I'll let Sean jump in. I think this was a great decision that we made. So anytime you guys do a project, think about this, that we as a team got together, we started on 1511, S4 1511, which we believed was fairly solid, but it was missing some functionality that was required at Delta Faucet. You guys have heard some of it that we've implemented here with the digital core and ERP. But we made the decision mid-project, essentially, to go to S4 1610, which I believe was a great decision. And that added, it's been a while, what was that, 2 weeks or so? I think
2 weeks a month.
2 weeks, 3 weeks or so to actually make that upgrade. So we chose to go ahead and do that upgrade because we knew when we launched, we would be N-1, which is really where we kind of wanted to be. When Delta went live May 1st, one version behind, and -1 is, I'm sure a lot of the pure ITS in the phone, ITSM would agree with that. That way, if we weren't in a rush to go ahead and do an upgrade at Delta Faucet. So that's definitely one lesson I want to impart to the folks in the phone, to consider that in your project.
The other contributing factor for that decision was the fact that we were noticing that a lot of the third-party software guys were not certifying for 1511, and they were certifying for 1610. So that kind of drove us to 1610 as well, to make sure that we had certified interfaces.
Yeah, I would say from a project management standpoint, we also wanted to make sure that before we got into our integration test cycles that we were on the version of the software we were going to go live on. So yes. That drove a lot of the timing to say, let's make the decision, stick with it, run all of our integrated testing through that specific version.
Yep, perfect. And so now coming to the next part of this was a lot of ECC transactions, especially if you're on an older version, pre-ECC 6, have been end-of-lifed or sunsetted. A lot in the finance area, some in the supply chain area and other areas, but there's a lot of T-codes that are still there. As you've heard, we've still decided for Delta Faucet to go ahead and use the T-codes in SAP GUI for now as we analyze the future functionality and replacements and analysis that we're doing. So Sean, I know you probably want to hit on the MB1A and how it goes to MIGO.
Yeah, so all of those MB star transactions are going to go to MIGO. If you go try to execute one of those, you're going to get a message that comes up that says that this transaction is no longer available. My 2 cents on this is, while I know some of our clients right now are still using the MB transactions on their ECC systems, I'm thinking this is like a 2-week transition where people are going to finally figure out how to learn MIGO and move on. So I don't think it's going to be really that big of a deal. It really wasn't a big deal for us. Our consultants were able to flip over to MIGO pretty quickly and get people up and running. Our user base, it didn't affect at all because they'd never used any of the MB transactions before going live. So, but I think from a brownfield transition perspective, I don't think you're going to really see that much of a setback on it.
Yeah, so S4 is really, and I think, Sean, you'd agree with me, especially from a brownfield point of view, S4 is nothing to be scared of.
No, right? You can implement if you choose to do so, you can implement S4 in a way that there's going to be very, very, very little impact to your user community from an ECC 6.0 system right now. So I don't think obviously that's not being shouted from the rooftops by SAP, but you can do so. You don't have to utilize all this new stuff. You can still use the SAP GUI. Almost, I would say probably 85 to 95% of the transactions that you're used to using in ECC today, they're still there. They still work. They still look the same. So from a user perspective, a lot of this stuff really wasn't that different.
Yeah, and even though tables have consolidated from about 50,000 for a default ECC install to less than 5,000 running on HANA, the new database and the app, you do have views for the old tables, so you can go still into SE16 and look at those views there.
All of your, if you're an ABAP query group that uses a lot of ABAP queries, those all still work. So those views that you call in your ABAP queries still fire just like we do today in ECC. So all that stuff still works the same.
Yep, and Sean hit on it likely earlier, you can, for a brownfield, or I like to call it an in-place upgrade, technical upgrade, if you will, you can go live with some Fiori transactions for certain departments, and then SAP GUI for others as needed from a change management. Again, every project being unique, you can look at it that way. You don't have to do all one or all the other. Do you agree with that, Sean?
Yeah, if it was me, I probably would do it by role. So if you've got people that only execute like maybe 2 or 3 little transactions in SAP, like I'm approving purchase orders and things like that, perfect use case for a Fiori type setup versus if I'm a planner, right, I might want to be back in the GUI to be doing all the planning transactions that are needed to set up planning.
Okay, excellent, thank you for that.
So speaking of everything kind of looks the same and is all the same, this is not the same. Unlike an ECC where you had the choice as to whether you wanted to do production versions or not, although they were usually a kind of a best practice, in S4 you absolutely must have production versions. They are mandatory anytime you want MRP to explode a bomb. That includes phantom assemblies, by the way. So the production version itself now has, whereas before you had to have a bomb and a routing to have that thing check and go green, for a phantom assembly now you can have only a bomb in there and have it go ahead and check green on that.
Okay, excellent. And 1 and 2, while we're on this topic, very quick about things that will change and you must have. In S4, even if you do use SAP GUI and very little Fiori, what you still have to do is finance does have a change, although the finance team usually loves that change, and it's called the Universal Journal. And they're going from 40 to 50 tables really down to 2 in that finance FICO area. Material ledger, things like that are there. Business partners, which I think we're actually going to talk about here in a moment on the slides, so I'll wait for that. That's another change that is different from ECC, but S4 is still core ERP.
The next slide is, I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to kind of go off of Tony's earlier point about BI. We struggled a bit with BI on this project. And I think that part of it is there were so many more new tools, I think, that came back onto the table in S4 for a reporting perspective out of core S4 that we also had BI system. We confused ourselves as to where we wanted to do that reporting and when, because we had so many options. And so I think it took us a while to kind of whittle through all the options and figure out what it was that we wanted to do before we could get kind of the truck moving, if you will. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's some of that challenge that Sean mentions is specific to Delta Faucet, because in our historical platforms, we had no capability to do any reporting out of the ERP system. So the mindset of all of our business users was, well, if I need to do any reporting, it's got to come from a BI system. So retraining all of our internal team that isn't necessarily the case in our new platform is something, honestly, that we're still working through. So there was a huge change management effort there. So if you're in a similar situation, I would start that message early and often.
Yeah, and you'll hear it from SAP. You'll hear it sometimes, and depending upon, again, the project. If it's SAP, if you're an SAP-only shop, which is rare, or mostly an SAP-only shop, you can probably get away with just doing reporting out of S4.
Right.
If you're bringing in non-SAP data sources, kind of to Tony's point, and then based on your user community that are looking for a business warehouse. So Delta does have a BW4HANA 7.5 implemented here to take in that data from non-SAP sources plus SAP running on HANA. Okay, that may go to the next one. So I think we kind of hit on this already a little bit. Pay careful attention to third-party applications, that they are certified with the version you're going to, as Tony pointed out, go live with, right? Make sure that, you know, what your project, which should be the same version you're working on your project, that's not impacted. A lot of that has been cleaned up now. 1709, 1809/1810 is getting ready to come out. A lot of that has been improved. More and more Fiori apps are coming out. There's at least 3,000 plus now native Fiori apps. Some of the rest are uplifted or wrappered around SAP T codes, but there's about 400 or so pretty consistently coming out every quarter, because unless this changed, SAP really isn't putting out any new T codes. So there are no new T codes coming out in the SAP GUI. The legacy ones are all still there. Most are still there, not all, most. As Sean said, about 90%. But any new functionality, especially in the PLN space, things like that, that's all coming out into Fiori and out of NetWeaver Business Client and that T-code legacy. Sean, anything else, or Tony, you want to add on this one?
I would just say be mindful of the timing, even after a release of S4. So if 1810 is released in October, the partners may take an additional 3 to 6 to 9 months to certify their product against that. I know we ran into that scenario a few times during our implementation.
Yep. Yeah,
it's not just the release date of the SAP product. It's going to take that lag time to get everyone caught up.
Yep, thank you. That's a very, very good point. Oh, business partners. So this, along with finance in S4, and we've done this across several clients now beyond just Delta, this is one of the big changes. So FICO, business partner, going from vendors, customers, employees, this really came out of that PPM, PLM area, because business partner is very familiar to those sidecar applications or components in the ECC side. So we had a daunting task of loading those. So this is where we had to actually code one of our accelerators to help get those loaded, because you have different options to load data. The migration cockpit, what used to be called BOS, Business Objects Data Services, now it's just data services, things like that. LSMW is still out there, works, not recommended, but it's out there. It's not recommended from SAP. So we did get this to work, but this is definitely one of the challenges, especially if you're a brownfield, you still have your own numbering, things like that. So you want to pay careful attention to this business partner area when you're planning, and of course start that data harmonization early in your project. And I'm going to look to Tony to start if he wants to add anything to this one.
Yeah, So I led the data conversion effort on our project, and I can say that I lost several nights of sleep on this topic. There was a huge change management aspect from how we managed partners in our legacy platform to how SAP views them. So again, I would say start early in education from a user-based perspective. This is one area where the standard programs that you could traditionally use with an LSMW wrapper have actually been disabled by SAP. So in materials, we use the standard LSMW program to load materials into 1610. John mentioned the accelerator that was developed, that was kind of forced upon us based upon, I would say
our best path.
Yeah, best path
forward.
Best path forward, given the maturity of all the other tools in the space at the time we needed it done. Yeah, Sean, anything else to add from your perspective?
I can validate that he did indeed lose a few nights of sleep. Yeah. Again, you know, you're taking a customer master, a vendor master, employee masters, and things like that, and you're kind of scrunching all that stuff together. Number ranges can become an issue. If you've got any number ranges that are common between those objects, you're going to have to get all that stuff sorted out.
Reporting and analytics become an issue too, as you consolidate partners, and that's not just a BP problem. That's a traditional problem, but I think it's exacerbated by the use of BP and some of the consolidation that we were forced into from a design standpoint.
And we're go ahead.
Just a quick point here. So the BP transaction, which is actually transaction code BP, by the way, is where you kind of go manage all of this data. And so at the top of that thing, there's I can't remember what the name of the field is, but there's different types of business partners. It's the business partner type. So you've got a type for a financial customer. You've got a type for a vendor, a financial vendor, things like that. My point was this: is that as you flip through the drop down at the top, all of the tabs and fields change accordingly to kind of show you that object and all those fields associated with it. If you're in transactional data, so if you're in a purchase order, for instance, it doesn't show you the BP at the top. It says vendor, and that's a vendor number at the top. So all of those downstream transactional pieces of data, they still look the same. It's really just this BP transaction that's largely different.
And that's where they're probably leaning from a best practice point of view as SAP, and depending again on your process at your company, but it lends itself to a more central master data governance, centralized master data governance possibly, from adding those things in versus having customer service does customers, purchasing does vendors, etc. Okay, thank you. And with this, I'll start with Tony, and then we'll see what Sean wants to add to some futures you can see at the SAP landscape at Delta, the target being mostly SAP-centric.
Yeah, so I talked about the goals of our program at the start of this conversation, and this is really a visual that would reflect the attainment of those goals. So as we referenced earlier, there are several assessments that will drive us to final decisions on how we manage through this platform decision in phase 2, phase 3 of our projects. But again, the goal would be to consolidate onto primarily an SAP-focused platform, limiting the amount of integration and creating data consistency across the majority of our enterprise applications.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And do you want to add anything specifically that we're evaluating?
I mean, specifically, again, I mean, I'm the plan and produce guy. So again, we're evaluating some things like Ariba and EWM and IBP. No guarantee that that's going to end up being the final solution that we're going to put in that spot, but we're definitely going to look at that stuff and assess and see if that's what's going to fit there.
Okay, excellent. So I think with that, Maureen, we're going to go ahead and go to our Q&A slide, and I'll turn it back over to you to moderate, and our panel here would be happy to answer some of those chat text questions, which are probably coming in.
Thank you so much, Tony, John, and Sean. As John just mentioned, we are moving on to our question and answer portion. If you have any questions, please submit them using the purple Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And if we don't get to your question, know that there will be follow-up after the webcast. But we have loads of questions, so we'll get right on in there. First question, for brownfield, is there a business partner conversion provided by SAP?
No, well, yes and no, but as we mentioned in Tony's Sleepless Nights and the help of some of our very seasoned sharp coders, we developed that accelerator a year or two back to get those things loaded in. And then those tools, and I do want to mention, the migration cockpit and all that is improving every few months. So SAP has come a long way with best practices, SAP Activate, and those tools to help. So it's going the right direction. So it's very exciting.
Next question, did you use cost-based or account-based COPA, C-O-P-A?
We're using primarily account-based COPA.
Did you have CRM before S4, and if so, any migration issues?
No.
Yeah, we don't use SAP CRM in any way. We do use Salesforce in limited capacity for some quoting and management of our new product development portfolio.
And we did interface that to S4.
Yeah, the quoting functionality is integrated with S4.
Thank you. We're currently in ERP 6. Could you tell us what the pro and cons for converting our vendor customer to BP business partner now in ERP 6 versus waiting for the S4 upgrade?
I have no idea.
Thinking about that question, so business partners, you have two choices when you're on ECC 6, if I'm understanding the question right. So you can't go greenfield and treat SAP as legacy, or you can do, or what they would call a bluefield, or you can do a brownfield and do that in-place migration plan, and there is tools to help do that and convert that data. It's just you want to be very cautious and mindful when looking at it. So there are tools out there now to take SQL to HANA, the database platform, and Oracle to HANA. You do have to be on Unicode, so you do have to be at certain levels at the database level.
Thank you. Another question, you mentioned LSMWs for data loads. What about other tools like WindShuttle? Did you use that?
Oh,
yes, we did.
Yes, we did for some, but not business partners. Tony, you're the guru on that.
Yeah, I would say we probably had the conversion tool split into about thirds, so maybe a third using WindShuttle, a third using LSMW, and a third using something else, either an accelerator that we developed through the project or a small op program.
Perfect, and that's probably direct. Do we do direct table, right? Some of those, I think.
We did on some. Others use the screen capture and
the normal process to
section.
capture logging. Perfect. Yeah, I just want to throw that out there. Okay, go ahead.
And also, just as a follow-up to that, is Delta or any other clients using any kinds of tools for master data management harmonization?
We do have some accelerators to help scrub data and help normalize that, help quickly call out duplicates and things like that. So yes, those tools are very helpful, and they do take time from having to recreate the wheel. Absolutely. And there are a few templates as well for mapping and loading too.
Next question, was the BWS HANA system greenfield?
Yes, everything that we've talked about implementing was greenfield.
Yep. For Delta, we've done some other clients with GyanSys that are both greenfield and brownfield, and one blue.
Thank you. And next question, how long did it take your finance users to cut over to Universal Journal, or was it all completely new?
Given that it was greenfield, I think that the transition was not probably as difficult as if you were doing an upgrade from a previous version of ECC.
Right.
Yeah, so we found other clients that have classic GL going over to Universal Journal, and then of course some have new GL. But the finance team, usually from a change management point of view, they're usually willing to dive in because they actually like it a lot better.
Thank you. How does business partner functionality behaving? Are all the different roles in their configuration, were they supported/documented in 1511? And was it promised to improve in 1610?
Wow, thinking back to 1511.
Yeah.
It had some issues in 1511. So 1511, there's a really good slide that SAP put out kind of showing, and I wish I would have thrown it in here in the appendix, bubbles of what 1511 covered from an ECC and a sidecar. As that digital core ERP grew, what more and more it took care of.
Right. We may have flipped over to 1610 before we really got into populating and loading business partners, so I'm not sure we can fully answer that here.
Yeah, it's been a while. We'd have to dust off the cobwebs.
Right.
No one should be going to 1511.
Yeah.
So.
And just a heads up, SAP pretty much squarely told us, we suggest you go live on 1610 versus 1511. So
yes, we had Delta had an SAP Angel that assisted, which was great to help get some of these OSS notes we talked about earlier. Thanks.
Next question. It's a couple questions, so I'll read it slowly. What is the maturation process on Fiori apps as you have experienced it? You noted that many weren't up to snuff initially, so it took you out of your plan to have no SAP GUI. How long must an app be out before it's trustable?
It varies. It really depends on, as they're separated by line of business. And you can go out to the Fiori apps library and check out there. That is a public website I would recommend. Some of the apps work great. Plant-to-plant stock transfer, as an example, saves a lot of time off of T-codes.
Yeah.
Others, there's bugs and performance issues, as Sean hit on. There's actually OSS notes. You can go out and search in OSS, and you'll see some of those notes out there. Again, it depends on the version you're implementing, and it truly is getting better every quarter. Eventually, SAP GUI will be mostly end of life, and everything should be pretty good. And that's the future. It's looking really good from a Fiori and the future point of view.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would say one call out when you're evaluating Fiori, a lot of the apps are really just representations of the GUI that it kind of wraps around.
Yeah.
So, just based on my exposure here, I would say maybe it's 15 to 20% true applications that are net new and different than the former GUI, and the other 80% is nothing more than a wrapper for a GUI screen.
Right. If it's an SAP GUI transaction that's fairly light, I'm thinking in my head Migo. So a lot of the transfer type things that you see, plant-to-plant transfer, storage location to storage location transfer type stuff, honestly works better in Fiori than it does in the GUI, and it's much faster. There's other things where they're fairly intensive transactions like VA01 for sales order creation and things like that, where we would see weirdness where scroll bars would disappear and things like that because it was, the transaction itself was bigger than a page, things like that. But I'm sure that SAP is going to fix that stuff eventually. It's just that we were a little early on.
That one specifically already.
Yeah.
I would say one other thing to evaluate if you're considering Fiori is what outside of the tiles would you like to put through that portal. So is there other information you're trying to share with the user community? We considered it, what was it, John, the universal inbox? I can't remember what.
Yeah, the workflow is better. That's the one that the PLM team, NPD team really wants to use.
Yeah, so there's some consolidation of workflow that you can do in Fiori. Yeah. There's sharing of other dashboards and analytics that you can do. It's not just the tiles to access the application, and probably consider all of those factors when making a Fiori decision.
Thank you. Next question, did you use SAP Activate for the project? Why or why not?
We have used that for several other clients, including Axiom Plastics, and did the model company. Here at Delta, because we started a little early and SAP Activate and best practices was maturing at 1511, So we really started kind of from scratch here at Delta Faucet. I don't know if Tony or Sean want to add anything more into that one. Yeah. It was just a choice,
Great.
really.
Yeah.
Next question, is your S4 implementation tool a proprietary tool similar to LaunchWorks but created for S4?
I'm not familiar with LaunchWorks, but our tools that we have, we actually do not sell the tools. We give those to clients when we are hired to do projects and or support or staffing.
And the next question, how long was the original timeline for phase 1?
Well,
So
there were two portions, phase 0 and phase 1.
It was only for a couple.
yeah, so the initial timeline had us going live in February of 2018.
That's right.
And when we came out of blueprint and design, we always had a gate there that said we'll confirm the delivery timeline at that point, knowing the scope is finalized. So once we set the scope, we never moved the timeline again. It was always to go live in May 2018. I believe the total project duration from phase 0, which was, do we change ERP and what ERP is that, to the deployment of SAP, was somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.5 to 3 years.
Well, but yeah, the initial analysis, the actual kickoff of the project was fall of, after phase 0 completed, it was fall of 2016, so about 18 or 20 months of the meet. Phase 0 did that. Delta wanted to have some of their target use cases, to-be processes, things like that. So a lot of that discovery analysis, planning, prep, all that was during phase 0. So it depends on your stage and where your company and where your project's at if you need that phase 0. Some clients have longer or shorter durations of that prep.
Thank you. Looks like we have time for a couple more questions. Next one, any salient points on master data and migration?
Could you repeat that?
Salient points on master data and migration.
Start early, start often.
Yeah.
Just like on every other ERP implementation ever, the sooner you get to it, the better off you're going to be.
Try and align it as best possible as a prereq to your integration test cycles, and coach early, coach often, get people in the data early. There was a ton of education that we had to do, not only with our business team, but our internal IS team, and I think even to a certain extent, some of our consultants that were learning BP for the first time too. So the entire project team required some level of education. And then we did not have a dedicated data team from a business perspective. It was all distributed amongst the various work streams.
Teams. Yeah.
And there's pros and cons to having that approach. I've worked it both ways in past projects. Just be aware of those pros and cons as you make that decision and staff appropriately from a bandwidth standpoint.
Very key.
Thank you.
Master data.
Thank you, guys. We have a ton of questions in here, so you will have to do some follow-up, but I want to be cognizant of everyone's time, so I will send it back to you for any final remarks, and then I'll close out our webcast today. But again, if we didn't get to your question, we will be following up with you after the webcast has concluded.
Okay. No, we wanted to thank you, and I want to thank Tony Wellman, who's the Director of Business Solutions here at Delta Faucet, for joining us here in a Delta conference room, and Sean Mahortra as well, and ASUG and Maureen and the team there for helping to do this, and all of you for joining today.
Thank you again, Tony, John, and Sean, for a great webcast. On behalf of ASUG, I'd like to thank GyanSys, Inc. and Delta Faucet, as well as everyone who took the time to attend this webcast. As I said before, if we didn't get a chance to answer your question, we will be following up with you after the webcast. Before we go, I'd like to leave you with some quick information on ASUG for anyone unfamiliar with our user group. ASUG helps connect SAP customers to the people and information that they need to maximize their investment in SAP. If you'd like to speak to someone about becoming a member of ASUG, please message info@asug.com. As mentioned before, the recording and slides from today's program will be posted to the ASUG website, and all registrants will receive a follow-up email. Please take a moment to complete the survey by clicking on the green button at the bottom of your screen. And with that, I'd like to close today's webcast. Have a great day.
Thank you.